I flatlined for 9 seconds on a Tuesday afternoon, and my mother found out about it from a text 4 days later. Not because no one called her, because she was busy and didn't check her phone, and by the time she did, there was nothing left for her to fix. I own 3 dental clinics outside Columbus. I built the first one out of a single rented chair, and a loan I was terrified to sign. 15 years later, I run a staff of 40, and somewhere along the way, I also became the person my family calls when something needs paying for. Quietly, not as a favor, as an arrangement nobody ever actually agreed to out loud. By the time you finish this story, you'll understand exactly what I mean by that, and you'll understand why, 4 days after I almost died, I was the one sitting in a hospital bed, deciding who got to keep what I'd built. Stick with me. The middle of this gets worse before it gets better. For about 2 weeks before it happened, my stomach hurt low on the right side. I told myself it was stress. I told myself a lot of things. I had 3 clinics to run, and a brother's small business loan I'd quietly co-signed, and a mother's mortgage payment that came out of my account on the 1st of every month like clockwork, and none of that leaves room for a stomachache. On a Tuesday, I was walking the floor at my busiest location, when the pain stopped being something I could push through. My office manager, Tasha, found me on the floor of the supply closet, grey, sweating, barely answering her. She called the ambulance herself. I remember her voice more than I remember the pain. Calm, fast, exact, telling the dispatcher my age and what she was seeing. I remember thinking, distantly, that I'd trained her well. My appendix had ruptured. By the time I reached the emergency room, it had been leaking into my system long enough that the infection had a head start on the doctors. They call it sepsis, when your own body starts attacking itself, trying to fight off the spread. My blood pressure dropped hard in the ER. My heart stopped for 9 seconds. They got it back. I don't remember any of that part. I remember a mask, a bright light, a stranger's hands, and then nothing at all. They put me on a ventilator and kept me sedated for 36 hours while the antibiotics fought to catch up. 36 hours where I could not call anyone, could not text anyone, could not do a single thing to reach my own family. For the first time in my adult life, the job of reliable one simply wasn't available to me. And that turned out to matter more than I understood at the time. When I woke up, the first face I saw belonged to a nurse named Carmen. She was kind in the specific, tired way of someone who has delivered hard news for 20 years. She told me where I was. She told me what had happened. And then she told me, gently, that the unit had called my listed emergency contact 6 times over those 36 hours. 6 times. My mother. I asked if anyone had come. She didn't answer right away. That silence told me everything before she said a single word. Here's what I learned once I got my hands on my own phone. My mother's number had been calling our family group chat all weekend with photos. My nephew Caleb's college send-off party, the one my brother Wesley had been planning for a month. Streamers. A cake. My mother in a paper Class of 2030 sash. Glowing, captioned, "So happy for our boy." 40-some messages. Not one mention of a hospital. Not one mention of me. I scrolled further back and found the missed call log from the unit's main line sitting in my mother's recent calls. Answered once, hung up on, then ignored 5 more times. A nurse later told me my mother had said she assumed it was a scam call from an unknown hospital number and didn't want it interrupting Caleb's afternoon. That alone would have been enough to break something in me. It wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 2 days later, when my cousin Renee, who showed up at my bedside within the hour once she heard, and never left after that, let something slip she probably shouldn't have. She told me that Priya, my brother's wife, had actually seen my last text before any of it happened. The one where I'd written, "Don't feel right, going to urgent care after work." Priya had read it, and she'd decided not to say anything to anyone, because, in her words to Renee, she didn't want to throw a shadow over Caleb's day. So it wasn't only that my family missed 6 calls from a hospital. It's that one of them knew something was wrong beforehand and chose silence on purpose so a party wouldn't be interrupted. That's not an accident, that's a decision. I want to ask you something, because I think a lot of you already know the answer in your own life. Has someone in your family ever known something was wrong with you and decided your timing was inconvenient? Put it in the comments. I'll read every one. I lay there with that thought in my chest for a long while, watching the monitor count out a heartbeat that almost stopped being there at all. And underneath the hurt, something else showed up, something colder and a lot more useful. I am, whether anyone in my family has ever said it out loud, the reason a few things in their lives keep running. My mother's mortgage has come out of my account for 4 years, ever since my father passed, and her own savings turned out to be thinner than anyone admitted. I co-signed the loan that opened Wesley's auto shop 2 years ago, the one that still wasn't profitable enough to stand on its own. And the week before all this happened, I'd promised to wire the deposit for Caleb's first semester at State, $12,000, due any day. I had never once asked for thanks for any of it. I told myself that wasn't the point. Looking back, I think the truth is simpler and less flattering. Being the one who could afford to help felt close enough to being loved that I stopped checking whether it actually was. Lying in that bed, alive by 9 seconds and a fast ambulance, I finally checked. I called my friend Marcus that afternoon. He's been my attorney since my second clinic opened, careful and a little stubborn, the kind of person who tells you the truth even when you don't want it. I told him everything, the 6 missed calls, the party, Priya's silence, all of it. I told him what I wanted done, and I wanted it done from this bed, today. He was quiet for a second, before he asked the only fair question. Dana, are you sure this is a decision and not a wound talking? Because in a hospital bed, those can look the same. I told him I'd spent 4 years quietly deciding my family's safety net was worth more than my own. The last 4 days had finally answered a question I'd never let myself ask out loud. This wasn't me hurting, this was me finally believing what I'd been shown. He said he'd be there within the hour, and that we were going to do this properly, so no one could later claim I hadn't known what I was signing. Before he arrived, I asked Dr. Alvarez, the ICU doctor who'd been honest with me from the first conversation, to confirm in writing that I was alert and capable of making my own decisions. She didn't hesitate. My labs were stable, my mind was clear, and she said so plainly, then offered to witness the signing herself. Carmen, the nurse who'd told me about the 6 calls, agreed to stand as the second witness. By the time Marcus walked in with his briefcase, I had a doctor to vouch for my mind, a nurse to witness my hand, and a lawyer to make it real. We did it on the rolling tray table they'd been setting my untouched lunch trays on for 2 days. First, the mortgage payment stopped, effective immediately. Second, the life insurance beneficiaries, my mother and Wesley's names came off, replaced with Renee and a new scholarship fund for my clinic staff's kids. Third, the $12,000 tuition wire, pulled back and cancelled before it could clear. Marcus notarized everything on the spot. Carmen witnessed it standing at the foot of the bed with her arms crossed, like she'd seen this exact reckoning more than once, and was glad, for once, to be on the right side of it. I didn't call anyone afterward to tell them what I'd done. There was no satisfaction in announcing it. The whole value of doing it quietly was that it didn't need their reaction to be true. It already was. It took 4 days for the silence to break, and it broke from the bank, not from any of them. Wesley called Renee first, not me. Even now it apparently didn't occur to him to call the actual patient, panicking that State's financial office was saying the deposit had never arrived, and Caleb was about to lose his housing assignment. A few hours after that, my mother's mortgage servicer left her a polite, very unmistakable letter about a missed payment. By that evening, my phone, silent for 4 days while I lay in an ICU bed, would not stop ringing with my mother's name. I let every call go to voicemail, not out of spite. I knew exactly how a phone call with her goes. She talks fast, she finds the angle that makes her the wronged one, and I end up apologizing before I remember what I was upset about in the first place. If she wanted this conversation, she could have it in the room she hadn't bothered to walk into for 4 days, in front of people who'd actually been there. They came together the next morning, my mother, Wesley, and Priya, all 3 of them filing into a room none of them had set foot in until money stopped moving. My mother led with a grocery store bouquet, and a smile so practiced it almost worked on me out of habit. She set the flowers down, kissed my forehead, and said the line I'd been bracing for. "You're so strong, honey. I knew you'd be fine." Then, barely a breath later, "Now, there's some mix-up with the bank. Caleb's deposit, my mortgage, let's get that straightened out." I didn't raise my voice. I moved the flowers aside and let Marcus set a short stack of papers down in the space where they'd been. I told them, flat and even, exactly what I'd done and why: the stopped mortgage, the new beneficiaries, the cancelled wire. And then I said the one thing I'd promised myself I'd say without flinching: the hospital called you 6 times while I was on a ventilator. You answered once and hung up because it interrupted a party. I didn't find out by accident that one of you knew I was already feeling sick beforehand and said nothing, so I'm not confused about where I rank. I'm just done pretending I'm not sure. The room went quiet enough to hear the hallway. My mother's face came apart the way composure does when there's genuinely no comeback left. First confusion, then anger, landing finally on the same accusation she always reaches for: that I was punishing the whole family from a hospital bed, that I was being cruel, that I should have made it clearer how serious it was. As if 6 calls from an ICU were a riddle, as if a flatline needed better wording to count. Then Priya, standing the whole time near the door, went pale in a different way. Because that's when my mother turned and asked her, in front of everyone, whether she'd really known beforehand, and said nothing. Priya didn't answer. She didn't have to. Watching my mother's fury land on someone other than me, for once, was its own strange kind of justice, one I hadn't even planned for. Wesley said almost nothing the entire time, which felt like its own small honesty. My mother left the room without another word, Priya trailing behind her, the bouquet still sitting untouched on the tray. I didn't take everything from them and walk away clean, and I want to be honest about that, because the satisfying version of this story would end there, and I don't think that version is actually true to who I want to be. The mortgage and the wire stay stopped. The insurance stays changed. That's Renee's now, and the clinic funds, and it's not up for discussion. But 2 days later, my mother came back, alone this time. No flowers. She sat in the chair by my bed for a long time without saying anything, long enough that I almost asked her to leave. Then she said, quietly, looking at the floor instead of me, I should have checked my phone. I keep thinking about the 6 calls. I don't have an excuse that doesn't sound small now. It wasn't everything. It wasn't even close to enough on its own. But it was the first true sentence I'd heard her say to me in years, instead of about me, and I decided that was worth something to build from, slowly, on my terms this time. I went home 11 days after I walked into that supply closet on my own 2 feet, and nearly didn't walk out at all. The monitor sound still shows up in my head sometimes, late at night, that steady beep that kept counting out a heartbeat nobody in my family bothered to come listen to while it mattered. I don't need them to feel guilty about that beep forever. I just needed them to finally hear it. If you've ever been the one your family calls reliable, and somehow never calls back, I hope this reached you tonight. Tell me below who actually showed up for you when it counted, and who you're still waiting on. Share this with the person who needs to hear it. And subscribe for the next one, because the people who hold everything together deserve to be the ones who get held, at least once.